Hello, Space Junkies, and welcome to What a Piece of Junk episode number 98. We are your Star Wars podcast here on the Fandom Podcast Network. I am your agreeable host, Scott Botman, and with me, as always, is my original Wookiee co pilot, our very own Dave Filclone. It's Mr. Miracle, the man of 1,000 nicknames, Mr. Nathan Miracle. Nathan, how's it going out there, bud?
It is going very well. It's a nice, balmy November summer day.
Yeah. I actually had to put on a hoodie when I went out earlier, which for me is incredibly rare, but winter has shown up.
Yeah, it wasn't here yesterday. And I was outside more yesterday, but yeah, either way, doing pretty good. Went to see Black Panther today, but hey, that's not what we're here to talk about.
Yeah,
We're
that's
here
a
to
whole
talk
different
about
podcast.
Star Wars.
That's right.
And
And this episode, we're going to talk about Star Wars in a way that you and I both love way too much, and that is Star Wars card games. Because we are honored to be joined by Mr. Caleb Grace, who is a former world champion for our card game friends and also a card game designer for Fantasy Flight Games. Caleb, welcome to the show.
Hi, guys. Thanks for having me.
We were so delighted that you said yes. I sent you a message and just on a whim, like, hey, I'm Facebook friends with this guy thanks to the Star Trek CCG. All he can do is ignore me, right? And then he actually said yes. Woohoo!
so
I was glad you asked.
Ignore.
Yes. So, Caleb, before we jump into grilling you with intense journalistic questions, why don't you let the listeners know a little bit about yourself and your background?
Okay, yeah. Well, I'm a senior card game designer at Fantasy Flight Games. I've been fortunate enough to work for the studio for I think it's 11 years now.
Wow.
It's been a long time. Yeah. I'm one of the old guys at the studio now. It's kind of fun.
Right. Yeah, I get that a lot.
But according to some, I'm still the new guy and will forever be the new
Yep.
guy. That's kind of an
Yes.
inside joke. Yeah, and you mentioned some Star Trek roots there. That was kind of a fun turn of fate when I did apply for the job, way back when. I actually was able to put, two-time Star Trek world champion, card game player on my
Beautiful.
resume.
Beautiful.
Like, never thought that would actually, be something that anyone would place a lot of value on, but it actually came up in the interview and really did translate to like an important skill, to be able to say, here's someone who understands card games and card combinations and that kind of
Exactly.
stuff.
Yeah. Because there is a real science to game design, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes as we get
Sure.
deeper into the interview. Not a lot of people realize it. It isn't just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. It's got some real mathematical theory and whatnot behind it.
You keep going. I'm going to write this down because I should know that.
Right? Yes. or as an outsider looking in, I have way too much esteem for the process, and it really is just throwing darts at a dartboard. No, we're so happy to have you with us. And for those who don't know, Nathan and I are big involved in the continuing committee for the Star Trek card game, even to this day. And so, we are so excited to talk to you about your Fantasy Flight Games history. 11 years is a long time in this industry. That's good stuff, man.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate. It's been a fun 11 years too. I'm excited to talk about this thing we're going to talk about because in that 11 years, I've honestly only contributed to the launch of just 2 or 3 games because I spent the first 8 of those 11 years working on the Lord of the Rings card game that Nate French designed, and I shepherded it. I shepherded that game for 8 years. So it's been really fun to see that come back now. We've kind of recently relaunched that, and it's doing really well. And I only stepped off Lord of the Rings when it had the opportunity to work on Marvel Champions. That's one of the first opportunities I had to do some original design work with Nate French and Michael Boggs. And
Good
so
times.
I still work on that.
Well, that rolls right into our first question for you,
Sure.
which is, what is your history with game design? So we know that this is your first solo credit with the design, but what other games have you worked on, and how does that compare working solo on this project versus working on the other projects?
Yeah, and
Right.
and I don't think we actually said this yet. We talked about it last episode. The game we're talking about today, which comes out in 23, is the Star Wars The Deck Building Game.
Yep.
So a lot of fans out there remember deck building games such as Dominion, Star
Hmm.
Realms, Hero Realms, etc. This is a deck building game, but of course with the flavor that we all love, the Star Wars flavor from Fantasy Flight Games. So yeah, all right, take it away, Caleb. Question number one there.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So, just talking about my experience as a game designer, Fantasy Flight is my first, career game design move. I don't think I ever had any ambition of actually being a professional game designer. It just worked out that way. It was very fortunate. But looking back, it was like, oh, I was kind of always dabbling in game design. Just wasn't thinking about it very seriously. It's just stuff I would do with my friends to stay entertained. Doing a lot of role playing games and a lot of like card games. Like we played a lot of the original Star Wars CCG from Decipher. Absolutely
Hmm.
loved that game.
Yeah,
And
beautiful
it
game.
was,
Beautiful
yeah, it
game.
was really only after they lost the license that I got into Star Trek. Because like
Hmm.
I was a big fan of Decipher at that point. Played their Lord of the Rings game as well. So
Yeah.
that was kind of again another happenstance of like I was able to put that on my resume and be like, I understand Lord of the Rings and I understand card games. And um, so I kind of gave you an overview of my history at FFG already. But what kind of was relevant to the development of the deck building game was moving from Lord of the Rings to Marvel. We made a real conscious decision to try to simplify and streamline our mechanics so that champions would be much easier to learn and play than Lord of the Rings. I think
Hmm.
both games are fantastic. Like I still love Lord of the Rings. It's still one of my absolute favorite games. But it is, I think, a little harder to learn at first. I think
Hmm.
once you get it, everything flows very well, but it's got kind of a high entry, um, kind of a high bar of entry. So with Marvel Champions, we really tried to do everything we could to lower that bar of entry and make it more accessible with pre-constructed hero decks and more streamlined mechanics, fewer steps, and so on. And the response to that was really quite overwhelmingly positive. It's been really fun to see,
Yeah, and it
and
and it continues to grow and continues to keep coming on strong.
that's great to hear. Yeah, thank you. So my lesson was really, and I was already learning this with Lord of the Rings as well, where like some of my early designs, I look back and I'm like, man, I was trying to do too much. I was trying to do everything. Um, and so I feel like this personal journey that I've been on as a designer has been learning the value of simplicity, the value of really trimming things down. And that can be really hard. I think it's the most common mistake that new game designers make is trying to do
Hmm.
too much. Um, and so I felt like the Star Wars deck building game was almost like the natural next evolution of my career was to like make something that's even more simplified and more streamlined than Champions, and the deck building genre lends itself to that, right?
Yeah.
Because Champions, Lord of the Rings, those are constructed deck games, and I see there's been a lot of confusion since we announced the game. A lot of people on the internet just assume that it's another LCG, another customizable game, which it absolutely is not. It's like you said, it's a deck building game in the genre of Dominion and Star Realms and DC deck building and others like that. So it was really fun for me to have a chance to take all these skills and experience and everything I've developed over the last decade and be able
Yeah.
to apply them to an IP as exciting and very personal to me as Star Wars. Um,
So when you
yeah.
got the message that you were gonna be making a Star Wars deck building game, and then they were like, "And you're doing it. You're the guy in charge." Were you nervous at all?
Well, that's what's funny. That's not actually how it happened.
Okay.
It was my idea.
Oh.
I was the
Oh,
one who
nice.
pitched it. Yeah, yeah. It was really. It kind of came out of this like lunch that Nate and I we go to lunch occasionally. Before COVID, when we all worked at the office, we'd go out to lunch every couple of weeks or so. And we're out at lunch one day, and I was just kind of talking shop and asked him, we've got this great relationship with Lucasfilm, and no one's ever done a Star Wars deck building game. Like, what do you say, that we make a Star Wars deck building game? and Nate had just taken over as the executive game designer at the studio, and he had instigated this new program called a design sprint, where you could get approval to dedicate maybe up to a week on a project. And so he's like, "That, do you want to do a design sprint?" I said, "Absolutely." So I got approval to take one work week and come up with a prototype.
Wow. Excellent. So you I guess you had the idea rolling around for a while, but you were able to get a prototype done in 1 week?
Yeah, it was actually really exhilarating to see
Yeah.
how quickly something could come together. Because yeah, at first you'd be like, "Oh my gosh, a week?" Like, sometimes it can take me a week to design like one scenario for Lord of the Rings or Marvel.
Yeah.
It can
Yeah.
take a whole week just to get one of those done. And here I'm going to come up with a whole game. But what you're talking about is not a refined product. What you're talking about is a proof of concept, right?
Okay.
So it's kind of the basic structure.
Yeah, yeah. Like for comparison, talking about Champions for just another quick sec. Like when we were developing, the proof of concept for that game, we would actually sit there with blank cards and just simulate a game. We'd have one blank card in front of us and say like, "This is my hero," and here's the first upgrade, and we'd play another blank card next to it, and we would just simulate that without even any game text at all. The Star Wars prototype was going to be more than that. It was going to need some game text, but it was basically just a step above that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, and at the end of that week, I got to sit down with Nate. Nate understands the process. He's as professional as they come, so he knows that he's not expecting, something that with a lot of polish. He's just looking for, is there something worth pursuing here?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Not expecting all the great artwork and all that at that point.
Honestly, it was too much for him to expect legible handwriting from me at that point. I had to tell him what some of those words were. He's like,
Yeah,
what does this say? I'm like, that's Luke Skywalker. He's like, "Yeah, are you sure?"
Did you write this in Arabic? I can't.
Duke?
Yeah, seriously, my handwriting has only gotten worse since like the third grade. It's just terrible now.
All right. Well, that's a good segue to my first question. So, question 2 we have here is, what about your personal history as a gamer? We've talked a little bit about it, but obviously, as a man who is somewhere in his 40s, you were growing up in the late 20th century when CCGs had their huge moment and came onto the scene, basically as a game type. So, if we were to time travel back to 1998, what is young Caleb Grace playing? What card games are you shuffling? Doesn't have to be 98. Sometime in the decade, right?
Yeah. No, it's just funny because I was really trying to place it. See, my first collectible card game was Middle Earth: The Wizards, which I think came out in like 1994.
Yeah.
And I've always been a huge Tolkien fan since I discovered The Hobbit at age like 8 or 9.
Yeah.
And so I was just so thrilled to have artwork representing all of my favorite characters and the chance to explore Middle Earth. And I just ate that up, but there weren't a lot of people playing.
I never found a huge audience for that game. That was the game that you had to do tests and you would actually roll D6s, or if you didn't have a D6, you'd flip cards, kind of like the Destiny number,
Yep.
And this, of course, was before the movies came out. So all the artwork
way before.
Was not stills from the movie.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was some really gorgeous artwork in that game, and it was just, for me, it was like a dream come true. It was like Middle Earth really came alive through that game, and I think that's where my deep love of card games really came from.
It's really spectacular then that you got to go on to work on that Lord of the Rings adventure.
Right?
I mean, that's just, come on, man. That's like storybook stuff.
It's amazing. It truly is.
Yeah.
That's still very special to me. Even after, like I said, 11 years at the studio, that's still very special to me that I got to
I will be brutally honest with you. The first time Nathan and I tried to learn how to play the Lord of the Rings LCG the adventure game, I think is the official title, right? We couldn't figure it out. We struggled with the rules, but recently we tried it again, and I don't know, maybe we got a hold of the more revised version that y'all have done, and you're definitely correct that it was streamlined and easier for us to understand. Of course, also the second time we tried Lord of the Rings, we had already played a lot of Marvel Champions, so we came at it with that kind of viewpoint, and
Cool.
it was
Cool.
easier to play the second time around.
Nice. Yeah, I absolutely love that game. One thing to remember about that is that Nate French basically invented a new genre of games with the Lord of the
Mhm.
Rings. The card game is, to my knowledge, the first ever fully customizable solo and cooperative card game.
Right,
And
right.
it really found me where I was at in my life at that time, because I had just moved back to my hometown of Duluth, and it's kind of a big small town. I still
Mhm.
love card games, but the only game people are playing there is Magic the Gathering, and I tried it out for a while. It's just not my cup of tea.
Yeah.
So when my brother introduced me to it, he's like, there's this Lord of the Rings game, which right away I'm interested. And then he tells me I can play it solo. I'm like, oh my goodness, are you kidding me? That's perfect.
Right.
And then the cooperative is there for like when my friends start to get into it. So that was just awesome. So yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think that it's got a bit of a learning curve, but that's also, it's a trailblazer. And the fact that it's still in stores and it's still
Yeah.
selling well. In fact, it's almost selling better now than it
Yeah.
did originally. That's so amazing. Like, what a legacy. And yeah, what a privilege for me to work on that when I'm such a Lord of the Rings fan.
Yeah, no kidding. That's
Yeah.
great.
So
So now,
after Middle Earth, it was Star Wars. That's what I got
yeah.
into next, because that's what there was a pretty decent crowd of people playing the Star Wars CCG back in the day. Even in
Mhm.
Duluth, there was like a crowd that would meet at Barnes and Noble like every Wednesday, and I'd have to ask my mom for a ride because I wasn't driving yet. Like
Yep.
yeah. But that was it. Yeah, and so it is kind of cool to be like, oh my gosh, Lord of the Rings and Star Wars. That's what got me into card gaming. And here I am, years later, and I have worked on Lord of the Rings and I've designed a Star Wars game. So yeah, it's super fun.
That's spectacular. Yeah. So now, a little addendum to this question. When it comes to Star Wars CCG and Star Trek CCG and those other ones, what game design elements did you really like out of them? So like when Nathan and
Mm,
I play cards, we're like,
mhm.
oh, this is a cool. I'm gonna do this neat combo with Han Solo with his blaster pistol and all.
Yep.
But we're not game designers, so you
Mhm.
probably see a whole different group of things coming together, and they're like, this is so beautiful.
Yeah, well, like at the time, I mean, I wasn't a game designer, right? At the time I was
Mhm.
playing, I was just a kid having a blast. And looking back though, yeah, absolutely. I've reflected on it a lot to go like, what was it about it that I liked? Because like the Star Wars CCG was so immersive. That was easily for me the strongest thing, was the sense of you could recreate moments out of the movie. The characters had abilities that reflected who they were in the films. And all of these things, like, I carried with me to designing my deck building game, because that's like, well, if this is what made that game work for me, I want to try to, reflect that as much as I can, in my game, to try to create that immersion and that feeling of theme. Um, but in fairness, that game was had a lot of rules to it as well. That it
Yeah.
could be a bit overwhelming. I gave
Yeah.
up trying to teach it to people after a few years, because it was just like, me
Yeah.
and my buddy played through college, me and my roommate, all 4 years of college, same roommate, and we played probably every other day. You know what I mean? Like, we played a lot.
That's awesome.
Occasionally would skip class to finish a game, like we were into it.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we could finish a game without referencing the glossary.
No.
We'd have to
No.
Yeah,
answer all these
absolutely
questions.
not.
The fact that they officially produced a book that came in the box called the
Yep.
glossary. I mean, come on.
Yep.
Yeah.
The special edition starter came with a glossary.
Yes.
And so there's a lesson there, right? It's like, yeah, try to keep it simple enough that you don't have to put a glossary in your game.
So I'm assuming that for the deck building game, there may be a glossary in the rule book, but there's not a inch thick book.
Well,
all
I'm not casting shade, because that game was amazing.
It was,
I'm just
yeah.
saying my takeaway, as trying to answer the spirit of your question of what lessons did I learn, is like I was saying, this personal journey that I've been on is trying to simplify my work, so that I think I could put it this way. I'm a pretty hardcore gamer when it comes to card games. I love, like, the deeper, the more complex, the more I can sink my teeth into it. Star Trek second edition was great for me, because there were just endless combos. I could think about it all the time. But what I realize is that I'm on one extreme end of that spectrum of gamers,
Yeah.
and your average gamer does not want to think about their favorite game night and day, 24/7, the way that I was when I was world champion. It was like, That's all I thought about.
Yeah.
Every moment of free time I had, I was looking at cards and thinking about new decks and so on. But your average customer, the people that drive sales and support studios with their, patronage, they're just looking to unwind at the end of the day.
Yeah.
They just want to sit down at the table with a friend and relax. And they don't want to have to think too hard. They definitely want to think because that's why they're playing a tabletop game.
Mhm.
But they don't want to have to sit there and figure out, now what the heck does this card do? What does this mean? And so that's where I think I started out in my career, maybe just indulging myself too much, just indulging my own preferences. And that's because I didn't go to school for it. I didn't have any formal training. So I'm just kind of learning by experience, and I get feedback from customers on my initial stuff. And it's like, oh, it's a little too complicated. All right, let's try to tone it down. So yeah, that's the journey I've been on, is just trying to make it as easy to parse out and understand and enjoy, but still, if possible, still have that depth of strategy there for people to discover on their own, right?
Yeah, totally. That's
Well,
great.
that is a great segue into our next question, because I'm also on that extreme end of thinking about how games work and how they function, how the cards go together, and that sort of thing. So the fourth question that we have is, or excuse me, the third question. What about the average turn in the Star Wars The Deck Building Game? How does that look? Kind of what are the phases, if you can tell us that, or
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
how
absolutely.
is that set up?
So I think that, pardon me, with the Star Wars deck building game, I was not looking to reinvent the wheel, but I was hopefully looking for meaningful ways to contribute something new, you know. So some of my favorite deck building games, like Star Realms, I'm a big fan of Star Realms. I think DC Deck Building has a fantastic game engine. The flow of those games, I think that's something as a game designer you start to appreciate it, is the flow and the rhythm of a game. Just the actual experience. How does it feel to go through the motions? The game ritual. And so I wanted to have a similar, game ritual that just felt really easy and natural, and just felt good to go along for the ride. So you have a 90 card Galaxy deck that's shared between the two players. And at the start of the game, you're going to deal the top 6 cards off of that deck into what's called the Galaxy Row, which sits between the two opponents. And you're going to orient Rebel cards to face the Rebel player, Empire cards to face the Empire player, and the neutrals you're just going to turn sideways so both players can see them. And then just to wrap up the setup there, then you also have the Outer Rim Pilot deck at the end of the row, and the Balance of the Force tracker between the two. And then on your turn, you have a hand of 5. You're always going to draw up to 5 at the end of every turn in the start of the game. So you always have 5 cards in your hand, unless your opponent makes you discard one, because the Rebels will do that. They are
Oh,
saboteurs
nice.
and disruptors.
Ah,
So on your turn, it's use it or lose it. That was an important thing for me, was I don't want this to be a slow, thoughtful, like beard stroking game where you have to carefully plan out you know 3 turns ahead. You're not doing that, because that's one of those things that turns off new players when they feel like I'm not even playing the same game as my opponent, because they've played this game so many times. They already know what they're doing. They've already
mhm.
mapped their route to victory, and I'm just here to watch. Like that's not the experience I want. So it's use it or lose it. You're going to play out typically all of your cards, and any cards that give resources, you're going to collect those resources right away. The game comes with these really nice plastic cubes, so you're going to collect. They're different colors. I think they're gold for like the resources and like purple for the damage.
Mhm.
So you're going to collect those resources, and then if you have the resources to buy a card you want out of the row, you can spend those resources and purchase that card by putting it in your discard pile. It's pretty standard fare. Nothing too original there. However, because it is a little asymmetrical with Empire versus Rebels, Rebel players cannot buy Empire cards, and vice versa. That goes back to the issue of theme for me, right? Like we talked about it. We discussed it like, oh, wouldn't it be kind of neat if the rebels could buy a TIE fighter? It'd be like they stole it. I'm like,
Hmm.
maybe. But I also think if rebels can buy empire cards and vice versa, then what's the point of even having the factions? I really wanted it to be like, no, only rebel players can buy rebel cards and only empire players can buy empire cards. But then of course the question is, well, what do you do if you're the rebel player and there's a bunch of empire cards out there? What do you do? And that's where the idea of sabotage and bounty hunting came from. Was, well, what if these cards had a little section at the bottom and it's upside down on the card so it faces the opponent, and this is the target value of that card. So the big example is Darth Vader, right? You just can't imagine Darth Vader working for the rebels,
Right, right.
or Grand Moff Tarkin or something like that. But you could imagine, and if you've read the comic books, you don't have to imagine, the rebels dedicating an entire squadron just to take out Vader, if they get the opportunity. And
A whole bunch
so
of your dead men.
yeah, exactly. I love that book and I love that moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. I thought, so this is great. So Vader is like an 8-cost card. He's like the ultimate baddie. He is like, if your opponent gets him, oh boy, watch out. And so a lot of players, if they get the opportunity to take out Vader, they will spend 8 attack instead of going after their opponent's base. They might actually spend 8 attack devoted to taking out Vader and eliminating him from the row. And in addition to that, in addition to discarding him and replacing him with a new card, you also get the reward. Each one of these cards has a reward on it. And Vader's is substantial because he takes 8 attack. When you defeat him, he grants 8 resources. And
Whoa.
oh no, I'm sorry, no, 4 resources. Sorry, the total adds up to 8. My bad.
Yeah.
4 resources I can count. I promise. 4 resources and 4 force. So defeating him will swing the balance of the force all the way to your side. Even if it was with the dark side at that time, it's coming back to you. And that felt appropriate. Like I've defeated Vader. The force is on the light side now. It's a big deal.
Yeah. And Caleb,
yeah.
what does it mean to have the balance of the force swing to your side?
Yeah, so that was something, again, like early on, it was like theme, like if you're making a Star Wars game, I mean, try to get the force in there.
Of course.
And so the balance of the force is sort of like this this game of tug of war that goes on throughout the actual game. There are some cards that just give force. So you have kind of 3 stats. You have resources, and you have attack, and then there's force. So like in the spoiler, I think there's like Luke Skywalker front and center, and you can see he has 6 attack, and he has this little 2 value, and that 2 is the force. So when I play a card that gives force, I'm going to pick up the force marker on the balance of the force track, and I'm going to move it that many spaces towards me. So whenever I play Luke, I get to move the force 2 spaces towards the light side. So if the force marker is anywhere in one of the 3 light side spaces and I'm the rebel player, then the force is with me. If I'm the empire player and the force is anywhere in one of the 3 dark side spaces, then it's with me. There's one neutral space right in the middle where it's not with either player. But it actually begins every game with the rebel player all the way to their side. And the empire player always goes first. So it's just a tiny bit of asymmetry. And it's actually a little tip of the hat to the old CCG, if you remember.
I was
dark
just
side.
about to say that.
The first thing I thought when I saw that.
Yeah, dark side always went first, and I think the rule book even said like it pays to be the bad guys or something like that.
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
And I just thought that was funny. And
I do also like that you have the double-sided parts of the cards, where the text is facing one way and text is facing the other. That also happened in the old Star Wars CCG with the sites. There was text facing.
Oh, yes, the locations. Yeah,
with the
I'd kind of
locations.
forgotten about that. Yep. Yeah, I guess in function they work so different that I never really thought of that, but that's true.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've always enjoyed the idea of putting a little bit something extra down at the bottom
Hmm.
of a card. There was an
Yeah.
old Warhammer 40,000 game from Sabretooth Games that did the same thing, but during combat, you would take all the cards in your hand, you'd turn them around upside down,
Mm.
and the stuff at the bottom was for use during a fight, as opposed. So you could have to choose: am I going to
Hmm.
use this person as a bonus in a fight, or am I going to put them into play as a unit or a
Hmm.
hero under my control?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I've seen a few games do it that way. I was excited with the deck building game because it might be out there. I haven't played them all, but I hadn't seen personally any deck building games that gave you the opportunities to sort of attack your opponent's cards.
Yeah,
Um,
that's really cool.
Yeah.
I'm not aware of that either. So I'm
it's
excited to
probably
do
out
that.
there. The moment I say that it's something I came up with, someone will prove me wrong and be like, "Ha,
Somebody
he's a
will do that.
liar! What an egotist!" But
Right.
in
Well,
in all
technically, there
honesty,
was
I
just
had
one
not seen
game
it
from the
before.
1950s that did.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, no, I was just really excited because to me, especially on the dark side, where it's called bounty hunting, it just felt so thematically. I mean, to this day, it's still my favorite thing when I'm the Empire to play Boba Fett and use him to bounty hunt Han Solo out of the row
Yeah.
because Han is a 5 target value in the row and Boba Fett has 5 attack, and Boba Fett's ability is when he defeats a target in the row, that is bounty hunting, he gets to draw a card. So you defeat Han, you get the resources and the force as the reward, and you draw a card. So it's this really feel good moment if you're the Empire player. If you're the
Yeah.
light side player, you're kind of like,
Yeah.
oh no.
This
Like,
sucks.
no, you got Han.
Yeah.
But that's great. That's still, in a way, a great feeling. Even though it's not
Mhm.
good for you in the game, seeing that moment that you can imagine within the Star Wars universe, I think is just incredible.
Yeah.
Um,
It's
so
funny. I realized I never answered your question about the Force. I got so busy talking about how you get it. I'm sorry. I do that. I get off on tangents. But to actually answer your question, the Force, it matters to certain cards, and that was by design. I didn't want the whole game to be about the Force. I didn't want it to always be like the determining factor of who wins and who loses, because I think Star Wars is more than just the Force. But the Force is obviously a very significant part of Star Wars, so it needed to be a significant part of the game. So there's a good chunk of cards that have text that begins with "If the Force is with you," and I think the biggest example of this was like spoiled on the back of the box on our product page is the X-wing. So this is sort of the Rebel mainstay, right? I mean, the X-wing is
Yeah.
so iconic to Star Wars and the
Totally.
Rebels, and so that the X-wing is a 3-cost unit with 3 attack. And it says, if the Force is with you, draw a card. So this is obviously, it takes what's a fairly okay standard unit and makes it into an amazing unit because it replaces itself in your hand. And so in that case, having the Force, it makes a huge difference.
Yeah. And
And
so Caleb, what
yeah,
is the bounty hunt text on that X-wing? If the dark side, attacks it while it's in the row,
right,
what's
yeah. So it's every card's target value is equal to its cost. So it's if it costs 3 resources for the Rebel player to buy it, it will take 3 attack for the Empire to defeat it in the row. And I think I can say, bounty hunting, sabotaging, these are all or nothing ventures. You don't place damage on it piecemeal. You're going to have to dedicate that much attack, and it's always going to come from units because it just didn't make sense to me that a Star Destroyer would go bounty hunting.
right?
Like it's like capital ships are fighting battles on a much larger scale. So
Well, and what was that lieutenant that said, bounty hunters, we don't need their scum, right? Of course the Imperial Navy's not going to stoop that low.
yeah. So if the Empire player takes out an X-wing, the reward is 3 resources.
Nice.
And this is actually one of my favorite things about the game and how bounty hunting and sabotage play such an integral role. They're not just there to move cards, it can also be a way of buying the card that you can't presently afford. Maybe you just have 4 Imperial shuttles in your hand, so you only have 4 resources, but Jabba's sail barge is out there for 7, and you're like, man, I'd really like that, but yeah, I can't. I only have 4 resources. Wait a minute. I have a unit with 3 attack. I can take out that X-wing, Now I have 7 resources. Now I can buy that big card that I want.
Yeah, nice.
Plus the timing of it was all about working into player advantage. That's a big lesson we learned from Champions is power to the players. Everything is about being empowered and feeling good. So when you bounty hunt something or sabotage something, the first thing you're going to do is replace the card so that you have perfect information of what's in the row. Then you're going to collect those rewards. And it's all optional. Like, you don't have to collect the reward if for some reason you don't want to. But it just worked out great. Also that X-Wing that I talked about, that ability of if the force is with you, draw a card. You do not have to trigger that ability the moment you play the card. All of these card abilities are optional, and you can trigger them during your turn when you want to. So, for example, if I play the X-Wing and I don't have the force yet, I'm not going to try to trigger its ability. But I might be able to play another card or bounty hunt something that moves the force to my side, and now I can use the X-Wing's ability to draw a card. And that was a small step from other deck building games that I've seen. It's not, like I said, I'm not reinventing the wheel, but it's this, from my opinion, it was like a quality of life improvement of I can still trigger this ability even if I couldn't use it at the very moment that I played it. And that allows for a lot of cool card combinations and smart play and stuff like that.
So the turn structure is, it's light side's turn, then it's dark side's turn. It's not, action, 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 back and forth, back and forth.
Wow, look at that. That's another question I didn't answer when you asked me. Yeah, the whole turn structure. You're gonna play everything. You're gonna use their abilities. You're gonna determine with each unit, do I want them to attack my opponent's base? Do I want to go bounty hunting with them? You're basically, you're going to do everything you can on your turn till you're done. At which point you're going to discard all your cards from your hand and from play, except for capital ships. Those will stay in front of your base to defend them. And then you're going to draw a new hand. Yeah, and then it goes to your opponent. So I'm going to play my whole turn, and then you're going to play your whole turn, and we're just going to go back and forth until one of us destroys the other's last base.
And then, so if Han Solo is in the galaxy row on the dark side player's turn, I, as light side player, may have to sit there and bite my nails and hope that Han doesn't get captured and bounty hunted until it becomes my turn, and then I can get Han.
Yep, okay, it really is kind of like oh man, I hope they can't get him. Like this, sometimes it's like this feeling of like the last card that you purchase on your turn is replaced with just the perfect card you want, and it's going to your opponent's turn, and you're like, oh no.
But see, all I have to do is redirect my opponent to get them to go after that other card so I can get the card I want.
Yeah.
It really is a fun game of tension, though, because let's say on my turn I played one of those capital ships that's been spoiled. I think we saw again on the back of the box, it's like a Star Destroyer.
Yep, there is a Star Destroyer
has Star Destroyers, right? That Star Destroyer has 4 attack. That's 4 attack that's going to my opponent's base every turn automatically that they leave it out there. So maybe I have a Star Destroyer in play, and now there's Darth Vader in the row. That's a real decision for my opponent to say, do I take out Vader, gain resources, gain force, stop them from getting the Dark Lord of the Sith, and leave that Star Destroyer in play? Or do I go after that Star Destroyer and they might buy Darth Vader next turn? It really is an interesting choice, and it's going to depend on where you're at in the game and what is the composition of each player's deck, what base do they have in play, how many left do you need to destroy. And that's what I like, is like you don't have to think about all that. You could just do whatever feels fun in the moment. But if you are like me, like a really competitive gamer, then you can think about all those things and kind of try to make the best call.
Yeah, cool. So you've actually answered several more questions as we kept on going. So good work.
Wow,
good
I tend to do that. I talk so much.
We did do a few comparisons already between Star Wars, the deck building game, and existing deck building games. We talked a little bit about Dominion and Star Realms and so forth. Are there any other games besides those that were major influences on the way you designed this project?
Let's see. So I only played Dominion once, and that was like right after it came out. I remember I had a friend who was really excited because that was the trailblazer.
Yeah.
Right. Dominion invented the genre, which, big tip of the hat to I'm sorry, I don't know the name of the designer, but that is quite the achievement. To this late in the game to still be inventing new genres and discovering, new opportunities. And I'm really glad they did, because deck building games have become one of my all-time favorite games to play. And so deck building games that I have played, like I mentioned, DC Deck Building, I've played that one a few times. I really like I said, I like the flow of the game. Clank is a big favorite of mine.
Okay, yeah.
But it's really more of like a board game too.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think that's really an apt comparison with like Star Wars is very much just a deck building game. There's no board. Beyond the little cubes, there's no, bits to keep track of. Star Realms is the one it's probably most similar to. And I've seen, a couple cynics online, like, oh, it's Star Realms in a Star Wars skin. And I'm like, that's a really nice compliment. Thank you very much. Because I've met those guys. I've met the guys that created Star Realms. I was there at Gen Con, like their first year that they launched Star Realms. And that was actually really fun, because I wanted it. I wanted to go and get a copy. And so I went and introduced myself and, was asking about their product. And I'll never forget, the guy was like, well, we have Star Realms and we have more Star Realms.
Right,
And it just became a tradition. Every year at Gen Con, I would go and find those guys and pick up whatever the latest thing was, because it's such a fantastic game.
I play the app version of it on my tablet and phone.
I've really played the app as well. Yeah, it's a fantastic app. Like that's, I think prior to the opportunity to create my own, that was probably my favorite one. And I am naturally biased because I got to design a deck building game that's exactly what I want it to be. So of course it's my favorite now. But I still have a ton of Star Realms. I still love it. It's still a fantastic game.
Cool. Well, you mentioned making the prototype in one sitting there. So Nathan, I'm jumping on down to question 5. How long from start to finish, did you work on Star Wars The Deck Building Game?
Oh, well, I kind of worked in spurts, really, because I was still working on Marvel Champions at the time.
Yeah.
So like I said, the design sprint was basically a 1-week time commitment. It was just kind of like cramming it in between other responsibilities and just whipping up something that was playable. Like I mean, I'm not joking about my handwriting, because we have these just these white cards, just plain white cards. You could sleeve them, you can write on them, and that's what I did. Is I made the 10 starter cards for each side with my own handwriting and just kind of blocking out space for text and where an image would go. And then I made a very small galaxy deck. It wasn't like a full 90 card. It was probably more like 30 cards. What's interesting though, some of those abilities like never changed. Like the X-Wing has always been the X-Wing. And I of course I kept that prototype. It's barely legible as it is. It's still kind of attached to a very fun memory. So I did that, and then showed it to Nate. And Nate's been a supporter since day one. He's so lucky to work with him. He really saw the potential. He's also a big fan of deck building games like Star Realms and others. So he got pretty excited about it. And so the next step was to develop the full prototype, and then do some refinements, with the goal of hopefully, pitching it to the studio as an actual product and trying to get it on the, on the release schedule. And so that took time. And then, like I said, it was really working on it where we could. So I honestly can't remember how much, because this all took place like during the pandemic as well.
Okay.
Like we were in the office. I think we played the original prototype probably just before we were all sent home.
Okay.
Just before it was like, okay, guys, everyone needs to transition to work from home now. Because I remember when I finally had the full game ready to play, I was playtesting it with my boy was 16 at the time, and I was playtesting with him because he was super into it. He was like, "This is so cool." He's also a fan of deck building games, and so he's like, "This is awesome." And I remember because when we felt like we'd had it a place where we were ready to share it with Nate again, we just set up a little tripod on our gaming table and aimed it at the cards, and then my son and I just we just played it so that Nate could watch. and his reaction was great. I mean, he just got really excited. He's like, I'm gonna have to go find my copy of Star Realms now, just so I can play a deck building game. Like, I want to
Yeah.
play this, but I don't have a copy yet.
Right. That's great.
That was a great reaction. Yeah, that was exhilarating. But then again, after that, it was kind of like, well, wait around for a while until there was another opportunity to refine it some more. And Nate and I, we did a couple passes together. We explored some different ideas, and then eventually, I don't know, at least a year went by. At least a year, maybe more. I have a bad memory when it comes to dates and times.
Well, if you were originally talking to Nate over lunch, that would have been at least 19.
Yeah, it was 2019 when it first got started.
Yeah.
But we did, we wrapped it up and finished it and got final approvals and everything quite a while ago at this point, like at least a year ago. I haven't quit playing it though. I mean, it's just
I've been
playing
great.
weekly
Yeah.
for like 3 years at least now.
Excellent. All right, Nathan, you can jump on to question 6 there.
Yeah, so we've already talked a little bit about the bounty hunt and sabotage mechanics. So one question that Scott and I had, because we were both very interested in those mechanics, was, are those actions, do things reference those actions by name, or is that just kind of a shorthand? And also, is it kind of the same action but for opposite sides? Does it work the same way?
Yes, and that was sort of a thematic concession. There was some internal discussions about, like, would the rebels really bounty hunt people? Like, should we call it something different to distinguish? Maybe it's more thematic that rebels sabotage and Empire bounty hunts. And it is, and it's made very clear in the rule book that they are two names for the same thing. And there are a series of characters, bounty hunters with the bounty hunter trait, who reference this action, but they're neutral. That means they can go on either player's deck. So that means they can't say bounty hunt, because rebels don't bounty hunt. So the action that they refer to is always like when you defeat a target in the galaxy row.
Okay.
So like, I think we see just a corner of like IG-88 in the box back on the product page, and like he's one of the bounty hunters, and there's others that you could probably guess who they are if you know the movies, and I thought it was really thematic that these bounty hunters would all have abilities then that trigger upon bounty hunting if they're on the Empire side.
I do notice now that Iggy, that's what I still call him, Iggy.
Sure.
Iggy has the gray background on his 5 attack instead of a blue background for Imperial or a red background for Rebellion. So yeah, he's neutral. I love that. That's great. That's excellent, because I mean, obviously we've seen in The Mandalorian and a few other productions where there's an IG series droid that is working for someone else who isn't the Empire.
Yeah, and I'm so grateful to Lucasfilm for just for understanding our vision for this game and really working with us to make it happen, because I could see an argument for why someone would say, like, oh, IG-88 should be Empire, but I really liked the idea that bounty hunters, their loyalty is really to themselves, and they're gonna take the money, right? With the exception of like Boba Fett, he's so antagonistic to the rebels in the films that I was like, I just don't see him.
Right. Yeah. Maybe someday old man Boba Fett will be a right side card in some expansion. Maybe. Good times. All right. So we're getting close to the end here. I know listeners who don't care about card games have already turned off this episode, so who cares? But question number 7 there. Of the cards that we have seen already, so including these that are on the back of the box, because that's awesome, which one of them is your favorite?
Oh my. I don't know if I could pick a favorite from...
Well, you don't have to limit yourself. You can do top 3, top 5, whatever,
Oh, that's
top
tough.
90.
Top 90. Yes, top 90.
Just cover them all. Let's see. We can see we can see Princess Leia on the back of the box there.
Yeah.
She's a big one. Um,
And I know that in the announcement article where it had all the diagrams to show us the galaxy row and whatnot, Nathan and I noticed in last episode of the podcast, we were looking at all that stuff, that one Cassian Andor was hanging out on the one of the example
yeah,
rows. So you can talk about Cassian if you want to. I mean,
sure. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of Rogue One. That
Mhm.
to this day is one of the most fulfilling and exhilarating movie going experiences I've ever had.
Yeah. Yeah.
We actually got to go as a studio, like all of FFG on a work day. We like bought out the whole, screening,
Epic.
and I mean FFG is chock full of Star Wars fans. So there was cheering and just positive energy. And holy smokes, I mean the last third of that movie is
Yeah.
just it's some of the best cinema I've ever seen.
Yeah.
And so another thing I really liked about it is it really focused on that Rebel versus Empire conflict that we see a lot of in the original trilogy, but it's almost like, well, it's secondary to Luke's journey, right?
Yeah.
And Han and Leia and the rest of the main characters. It's still there and it's still awesome. But what I liked about Rogue One is it kind of put it front and center, so
Yeah.
that we got to see, more of this conflict that they, the original trilogy was, really, teasing. Um, and so, yeah, I was really excited to include all those characters in the game. And again, just so happy with LFL for letting us build the game we wanted it to, and include all these characters. So yeah, Cassian. I forget where's he in the? He's like in the.
He's in the row that's talking. I think it's showing the example of how.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So he has he's sort of the rebels' answer to Boba Fett.
Okay.
Let's see.
Yeah, we can see it cost 5 and has 5 attack.
Oh, I'm looking at the wrong spot. Yeah, so he's like, yeah,
he's off on the right, and he's like half faded out.
Okay. Yeah, he and Boba Fett are both the 5 cost 5 attack units for their side, and like Boba Fett, I said his ability triggers off of defeating a target in the row. So does Cassian's.
Okay.
And Cassian's is almost like the negative of Boba Fett's. Cassian, when he defeats a target in the row, will make your opponent discard a card from their hand.
Nice.
And
that's cool.
yeah, and for me, it's all about theme. It's all about, like, when we're first introduced to Cassian in Rogue One, he's almost an assassin. Like I remember watching the movie the first time, going, "Wait, did he just shoot that guy? Like,
Yes.
what?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh!" And he did it to, like, right, and he did it to protect those secrets. And so I liked that idea too. That Cassian, he's out there protecting the rebel secrets and taking resources from the Empire.
Yeah.
So that was fun to do that one. But I see it. Okay, actually, asking about my favorite card, I realized I do have the perfect answer. It's on the back of the box. I don't think we can read it, but I can tell you what it is. So there's the Rebel Commando there. If you find Princess Leia on the back of the box, the Rebel Commando's just above. I was saying earlier about the Rebel theme is partly saboteurs and disruptors, and there's this hand discard on some of those. Cassian's a big one. The Commando is probably the most dangerous and feared one of when you're the Empire player. You're going to take almost every opportunity to bounty hunt the Commando because the Commando's ability is, just make your opponent discard a card from their hand. However, if the Force is with you, that discard is random.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And so the joke with my friends is you have to discard a rando from the hando for the Commando.
All right, we are stealing that joke.
And that's why it's my favorite, because I always love discarding a rando from the hando for the Commando.
That's great. And I love what you were saying about how Boba Fett's like the ultimate bounty hunter. So he adds insult to injury when he pulls off attacking a card in the row. And then Cassian's the ultimate saboteur. So he adds insult to injury when he pulls off attacking a card in the row. That's great.
Yeah, it was just so much fun for me. Like, the whole thing was a passion project from the beginning when I was pitching it, saying, Look, I love deck building games and I love Star Wars, and no one's ever done a Star Wars deck building game. Like, we have this amazing relationship with LFL. We have all these resources and experience. Like, let's do it. And when Nate offered me, like, do you want to do the design sprint? Like, heck yes, I do. Like,
Yeah.
I want to make all these cards. I want to make Luke and Han and Cassian and Vader and Boba Fett. And I want to do all of these because I know exactly what they should do. You know,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
when I talked to Charlie Hall from Polygon, uh, it, it it was in the interview. The whole story didn't make it into the article. Obviously, he didn't have time to write all of it, but he was asking me. He says, "So can you crash a Hammerhead Corvette into your opponent's Star Destroyer to blow it up?" And I thought he was like setting me up for an easy slam dunk because that's exactly what it does. And
Yes.
he had looked at that, but I guess he didn't see that one. So I think he was just trying to joke. And I was like, no, you really can. He was like, what? It was this great.
Yes.
He and we just had this great laugh. It was so much fun because, yeah, that's exactly what it is. You can sacrifice your Hammerhead Corvette, by removing it from your deck to just immediately destroy your opponent's capital ship. And of course, the ultimate is the Star Destroyer. So that's the moment you're trying to set up.
Yeah.
Yeah, play
Beautiful.
your Star Destroyer, buddy. I got something for you.
I got a plan.
Stellar.
Dial up a Hammerhead Corvette.
Yep.
All right. Well, we have one last question for you. So there's a lot of characters and moments and whatnot that we expect to see in the game. We know that Han and Leia and Luke are going to be there. I'm crossing my fingers for Chewbacca. But what are, and I know you're limited in what you can tell us, but are there surprises out there? Things that big time Star Wars fans aren't going to expect?
That's a good question.
Go ahead and give you 2 yeses on that. I know Scott and I were surprised to see Cassian because we were talking about Andor at the time. I was also surprised that the Outer Rim Scout is Boshek, the guy from the Cantina.
Yeah, that actually kind of a fun story behind that. Our executive graphic designer Brian Schomburg, he's a industry veteran. He's been doing this for 20 years. We're so lucky to have him.
Wow.
And he is the nicest guy you will ever meet. And he's a huge Star Wars fan. And so when we made this game, part of my rationale for why we should make this game is that we have all this fantastic art from the LCG, from Destiny, from X-Wing, from all these different games that by the time our deck building game gets released, there's a whole generation of gamers who have never seen this art before.
Yeah.
And for everyone who did play the LCG, it's been a long time, and so I was like, I don't even want to order new art because we have all this amazing art that I want to use. And so Brian, as the head of like visual everything at FFG, and a big Star Wars fan, he's like, I think I'd like to pick the pieces for these cards. And it was great. It was just like he got to just comb through this just mountain of amazing artwork and cherry pick all his favorites. And I recognized that. I thought the same thing as you. Like right away, I was like, oh, the Outer Rim pilot is Boshek. Oh, that's interesting. And I asked him about it because like I was just imagining, some random Star Wars character, and he was basically like, well, I didn't figure that you were going to actually make a Boshek character, because he's pretty far down the line of recognizable characters. He goes, but so I thought it was fitting to get his image in there as a representative of that. And I thought, this is why we're so lucky to have Brian Schomburg, because it was just it wasn't just a great art decision. It was a great game and production development decision. So my game benefited from a lot of really talented people completely surrounding me, and taking my ideas and then just elevating them to the next level or two. Like my graphic designer, Lawrence Smith, this was his first project for FFG, but far from his first graphic design project, and he absolutely killed it. Like,
yeah,
I remember showing the art in the frames to one of my playtester friends for the first time, and he'd lost his mind because he already loved the game. We'd been playing with these cheap, proxy cards with
Right,
no
right.
art and no graphic design, and just loving the game for a year at that point. Just regularly playing for a year with nothing but just the most boring paper cutouts you can imagine. And then suddenly he gets to see this game like fully realized, and he stood up like, you're like, no, like he meant it. And that's how I felt too. Every time Lawrence showed me like his new development, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so lucky to be working with you. Like, it's just beautiful. It's one of the most beautiful games I've ever seen, and I'm so lucky that it's you did this with my idea. So very fortunate to be surrounded by so many good people helping me like that.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So, are there any other characters or cards or anything you could mention that you think might surprise fans?
Boy, that's such a hard question for me to answer. I don't really know. I feel like I want to use the opportunity to talk about like the bases, because the bases are
Sure.
such a big part of the game, and the Death Star is there on the back of the box, and I don't think how many people are going to be surprised that Death Star is in the game, but they might be surprised that it has such a powerful ability,
Yeah.
and that bases can be so pivotal to your overall strategy. Because if you look at the back of the box there, the Death Star's ability is to spend 4 resources and destroy an opponent's capital ship. So, I mean, that could be their Mon Calamari Star Cruiser
There you
with
go.
6
And
hit
somebody
points,
yells, "That thing's
and,
operational!"
and just
It's a trap.
boom. Then that's the end of that,
Yeah.
and that's like, boy, what a feeling when that happens.
Yeah, that's cool. And I noticed that it actually also says in that ability, or a capital ship that's in the galaxy row. So
That's right.
the
Yep.
Death Star is a base that can do the essentially bounty hunting for a capital ship in the row. So
Yep, it's one of the few tricks that will let you. And since we talked about the Hammerhead Corvette already, I'm fairly certain. It's been a while since I looked at that card and read it so closely because I basically play from memory. But
yeah,
I'm fairly certain that you can crash that into a ship in the row as well to get rid
cool.
of a ship out of the
Nice.
row. Yeah,
Now, rules question going off in my
sure.
head here. The Death Star doesn't actually say anything about it being a rebel or neutral capital ship in the galaxy row.
Yeah,
Can you blow up your own Star Destroyers that you have not purchased yet?
you can. Yep, that was kind of a decision. Like, that's one of the Empire themes.
Yeah, you're just another cog in the machine, baby.
Exactly right. I don't know if there's so many cards I want to talk about that probably haven't been spoiled yet, but that's connected to, like I said, I wanted an element of asymmetry in the game. It's not a truly asymmetrical game, as you both have the same, victory condition, but each faction has its own strategies and identity. Like I said, the light side, they care a lot more about the Force than the Empire does. And that's because the rebels, that's their battle cry, right? Is, may the Force be with you.
Mhm.
The Empire is much more about just mass quantities, faceless units, and like you said, you're just another cog in the machine. You're all disposable to us.
Yep.
So it is a different experience which side you play, and also the nature of the Galaxy deck. It is a 90 card deck, and I don't think a lot of people are ever going to play a game where they go all the way through that deck.
Right.
The game is modular in its design a little, that the base like intro game is play to 3 bases, but you can increase that number if you want to play longer. I think a standard game is to 4. You could play a long game to 5. There's nothing stopping you from playing until you've defeated all 10 of your opponent's bases.
Ooh,
Um,
okay.
I've never done that because I'm pretty satisfied at 4 or 5. But the reason I bring it up is because in a standard game, you're going to see probably half of that Galaxy deck, maybe 2/3, which means there's going to be cards that just don't show up in the game. Luke is 1 card in 90. So Luke might not show up every game. And that kind of, for me, adds to the replayability of, like, if Luke shows up, that's a big deal. It's like, oh my gosh, Vader's here. Watch out. This is a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah, that
And
makes
yeah.
sabotaging and bounty hunting all that much more powerful.
Mhm.
Because if Luke does get bounty hunted, he's probably not coming back.
Well, so yeah, in general, probably not. Of course, without giving too much away, there are some answers to that. There's some tricks in there that I think are thematic and people will enjoy, and it'll be fun to talk about them when they're revealed. You know.
It's not like there's a whole race of junk dealers in the Star Wars galaxy that would maybe deal with wrecked stuff in the discard pile or anything, but we'll leave it at that.
Did you get a sneak peek at some files I don't know about?
Yes. Anyway, well, Caleb, it has been so awesome having you on the show, man. Is there anything else you want to talk about before we let you go? And then Nathan and I are going to go do the rest of the show.
Oh, guys, just thank you so much for the opportunity. You know, this is the first podcast invitation I've had to talk about the deck building game. You know, like just casually like this. So, thanks for asking me to come on. And of course I want to share and spoil so much more, but I might get in trouble if I do that. So I should probably just be happy with everything we've already talked about. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
we'll have to ask you back once the game actually releases, and we can talk about everything.
Hey, that sounds great. I had a great time chatting with you guys. I'd love to do that. So thank you so much, and I look forward to that.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Caleb, and as always, may the Force be with you, brother.
Yeah, thank you. You too.
All right. Well, Nathan, that was amazing. I think that the deck building game for Star Wars is going to be so much fun. And I can't wait to play games with you. And then, maybe we'll be able to bump into Caleb at some convention someday and be like, hey, we're the guys from that podcast. And he'll be like, who? So,
I guarantee you, once I get my hands on this game, I'm going to have a day where I just put it on the table. Even if you're not available, I'll just be running from side to side of the table, playing both sides.
I mean, it's not like you don't.
That's how I played card games way back in the day before I had friends.
Yeah, exactly. When I met you and I was all like, you ever play the Star Wars game? And you're like, against other humans or just in general? I mean, so.
Those are different answers, yes.
Cool. All right, well, we're going to take a quick commercial break, and then we'll come back and talk about Episode 10 of Star Wars Andor.
Thank you for listening. We hope you're enjoying this podcast. Here are the other great shows on the Fandom Podcast Network. Culture Clash, where we discuss the latest in entertainment and pop culture. Blooded Kings, our show covering the entire Highlander universe. Couch Potato Theater, we celebrate our favorite movies. And Time Warp, our Fandom Flashback show discussing a year in movies and our favorite retro movie, TV, and pop culture topics. Good Evening, discussing all things Alfred Hitchcock. Hair Metal Podcast, we cover the rock metal music of the 80s and early 90s. Type 40, a Doctor Who podcast, discussing the time-traveling Doctor Who universe. Lethal Mullet, an action film podcast covering the 80s, 90s, and beyond. Also, check out the Lethal Mullet Network for more great podcasts. What a Piece of Junk, our Star Wars podcast. Making Treks, a Star Trek podcast with a deep dive into the final frontier. The Fandom Show, our Fandom Podcast Network live YouTube show discussing the hottest topics in fandom. The True Believers MCU podcast, discussing the Marvel Cinematic and Television Universe. Union Federation, our Star Trek and the Orville Show. And we're proud to welcome the BQN Network to the Fandom Podcast Network. Please visit our friends on the BQN Network, a Star Trek Universe podcast that also includes your favorite topics, movies, history, superheroes, and more. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on YouTube. The Fandom Podcast Network is also on all major podcast platforms. The Fandom Podcast Network audio master feed is on Podbean at fpnet.podbean.com. You can find the Fandom Podcast Network on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can email us at fandompodcastnetwork@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening, and remember, respect others and enjoy your fandom.
All right, cool. Thanks, Kevin. As always, we hope you guys check out those other shows. And speaking of other shows, Nathan, let's jump into our discussion of Star Wars Andor Episode 10. This was the big prison break episode, baby. Yes. One way out. I was so excited to see that Kino and Andor and the rest of our heroes were able to get their plan to come to fruition and make their escape from the prison there on Narkina 5. So, yeah. Nathan, what did you like best about this episode?
Well, a few episodes back, we had kind of a lull where I said I wasn't too into the heist, and I felt like they were telling us things instead of showing us things. And ever since then, I feel like every episode has been my new favorite episode. So this
Great.
is my new favorite episode. And I think the thing I loved most was Kino.
Yeah.
And we knew that he was going to kind of turn when he said the whole thing about never more than 12 guards. Right? So we knew kind of the direction he was going. But at the very end, when it was revealed that he can't swim,
Oh, man.
that like I could see it coming. When he stopped and Cassian turned around, it's like, what's wrong? Like, I'm sitting there going, he can't swim. Like,
Yeah.
I could tell that's what's about to happen. But then he said it. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so powerful that he, like, part of the reason he never wanted to break out is he knew he couldn't actually make it out. And yet, when he saw what was really going on, he's like, no, gotta help, even though I know I'm probably dead.
Yeah. Yeah. I was amazed at seeing how far Cassian and at least Melshi, because we know he's in Rogue One, but seeing how far some of them had to swim. I mean, the land, at least from the aerial view, the land seems to be miles away. So yeah, who knows how many of them actually did drown and whatnot? But yeah,
I'm
powerful
not sure.
scene.
I'm not sure if it's implied that all of them except Cassian and Melshi drowned, or if the others just went off in other directions.
Right.
There's a lot that we don't know in this show.
Yeah.
And I think that's incredible because the whole show is from Cassian's perspective.
Right.
So there's things I think we'll never know.
Yeah, totally.
So how about you? What was your favorite part?
I liked the scene where the guards that had the shock batons were all cowering and hiding in like a little maintenance or closet area, and you could see the armed prisoners with their blasters running down the halls and stuff through the tiny little window. I just love the poetic dichotomy of the tables have turned and now the guards are the ones that are imprisoned in that little room. They can't escape because the inmates are running the asylum. The prisoners have taken over, and I just like how that is a poetic reversal of fortune, if you will. So that was my favorite scene. Definitely was seeing those guards with their, no longer in their position of power or abuse, if you will, because obviously plenty of these prisoners did not deserve to be there.
Yeah, and I think we're spoiled for choice on excellent scenes in this particular episode. But there is the flip side of the coin. Scott, what was your least favorite scene from this episode?
So I think the part I disliked the most was they didn't quite give me enough of an explanation as to why Cassian was struggling so mightily to make that water line leak. Like, if there had been one scene, and maybe this happened and I missed it, but I don't think so. If there had been one scene where he's telling Melshi or telling Kino, our plan is to flood the floor so that it'll short out and they can't shock us all, that would be great. And I think that's what happened, was it caused the thing to short out. But I don't know for sure. Somehow or another, it malfunctioned. Although it didn't malfunction quickly enough or badly enough to prevent it from still killing a few guys when the prison break began. Because a couple of people were running toward the table because, Kino's like, get on the tables, as they hit the button to shock people at the floor. And one or two guys didn't make it in time. But I also couldn't figure out, was Kino standing in water? And so that's why he didn't get shocked, or he was on the table?
I think it's I think he was not standing on water. And watching it the second time, I kind of pieced this together. And this will teach me to ask the questions because you stole my answer. That was exactly what I was going to say. I could have used a bit more explanation of what that plan was. But watching it the second time through, I realized the person that we see get shocked, and we see lots of sparks of electricity come off of them, they were touching the water.
Okay.
Kino was on the floor, but he wasn't in the water. So I think Kino actually did get buzzed, but they
but
weren't
not die.
killing. They weren't
Yeah.
intending to kill anybody with that. They were intending to immobilize everybody, but the water caused the electricity to take one person out, or at least severely injure them. I'm not
Yeah.
sure if they were dead or just unconscious. But I think that was the idea, was that the water would cause a short, and that would cause the power to go out. But it did take 2 viewings for me to put that together. The first time I was sitting there thinking, I was thinking because the station is powered by hydraulics, that he was essentially cutting a power line.
Oh, okay.
But
Okay.
that's not. I don't
It's not-
think now that that's actually what was going on.
Yeah, that's generally not how hydraulic or hydroelectric power works. It's just the water turns turbines, and it's just treated like regular electricity.
Yeah, but I thought maybe that was a pipe that went to some
Oh,
turbine.
Yeah, but I agree with you. It doesn't appear that that's actually what was happening.
Yeah, so that part was a little bit confusing, but I mean, that's my biggest gripe about this episode.
Yeah,
So-
yeah, it was a really great episode. Otherwise, all right. So, question 3: what connections did you draw with the rest of the Star Wars galaxy?
So the biggest thing that I had a connection with was Rogue One,
Yeah.
because it had a very similar feel of, we're going to take this opportunity and we're going to do whatever we can right now. And then we're going to take the next opportunity and the next opportunity,
Yeah.
until we've run out of chances, and either we've escaped or we're dead. It had that same vibe.
Yeah.
So I almost think that's kind of where Cassian got on board with that. And
Yeah.
I also think, going back to Kino, kind of sacrificing himself, fighting for something that he knows he's not necessarily going to benefit from, may have played a role in Cassian going on what turned out to be a suicide mission later on in Rogue One.
Well, certainly. So my answer to this is Luthen's speech in this episode to the guy who's the mole for the rebellion inside the ISB. First of all, oh my gosh, they have a mole in the ISB. That's amazing.
That dictatorships in the Star Wars universe should never trust any high-ranking redheads.
That's right. Yes, General
Because
Hux is the spy.
Hux did it. Mara Jade
Yeah.
turned
Yeah.
to the light side.
Yep.
So yeah, redheads in the Empire, they're leaving.
Yeah. But Luthen's speech to me was the big connection between that and the rest of the Star Wars galaxy, because it was reminiscent of him talking about how the ego that began this rebellion will never live to see anyone, benefit from it. And to me, that is just so illustrative of other parts of Star Wars where somebody knows that they're making a sacrifice for the greater good, but they'll never know what benefits came from it. It absolutely foreshadows, like you said, Cassian and Jyn Erso's own sacrifice on the beach at Scarif, as they know that the wave of atom bomb destruction type thing is coming for them once Tarkin nukes that part of Scarif. So like, I just love the way that Luthen was like the light side mirror of Palpatine, in that he very much said, I use my enemies' methods against them, even though they're horrible and deplorable, because this is about my ego. But it's not about his ego wanting to take over like Palpatine's ego and create an empire. It's about him wanting to stop Palpatine's ego and destroy an empire. So they're two sides of the same coin. Very much a light side to the dark side. And yeah, it was really good.
He's fighting for a dawn that he knows he'll never see.
Right.
Palpatine's fighting to stop anybody from seeing the dawn.
Ever.
I don't know. That metaphor may
Yes.
not have gone exactly the
Yeah.
way I wanted it to, but
Something sunrise, light of freedom,
Dark side.
something. Yeah. Totally. Yeah. That was really good, and the scenes with him talking to the mole from the ISB were just outstanding.
All right. Well, as always, we've got 2 kind of bonus questions here. So the first one, I related this back to my favorite part of the episode, Kino. What do you think happened with? I don't think that we're going to find out in Andor. So this
No.
is speculation. What do you think happened, and do you think we'll see him again in any capacity?
I think we will see him again in some other series, and it will help us to figure out that he somehow did get out of the prison on Narkina 5. And I think it might be a comic book, right? That's actually kind of what I'm feeling. A comic book that has the character, drawn as Andy Serkis likeness. And we'll see him in some cantina somewhere, and somebody will be like, "Hey, weren't you the guy from Narkina 5 or however you pronounce that planet?" And he'll be like, "Yes, I couldn't swim, but," and then a couple of panels of a flashback to show how he, I don't know, like ripped a hunk of thing off the wall, and it had he found an emergency inflatable craft that the prison had in some hidey hole with a first
Or
aid.
some other prisoner grabs him and it's like, I can swim for both of us.
Yeah, totally. And then he explains to whoever he's talking to at that cantina, people thought I was dead, but I like it that way because now the Empire's not searching for me or whatever. So yes, he'll be back, and I predict it'll be comic book style.
Yeah, so I'm going to go with a slightly different take. I think he's been too great of a character for them to not bring back in some capacity. But this is Star Wars. Sometimes we go backwards. I think we will see him in a comic book capacity, but I think it's going to be the reverse. It's going to be kind of a prequel showing how he got into prison and what his backstory was. You and I talked a little bit last time about Andy Serkis and his view of what the character was. I think they may take some of that and say, you know what, this is good. Andy Serkis is a smart guy.
Yeah. He has written a few things.
So I think we might find out that he did die. I think it's also possible that we find out that he faked his death, that he got out, but then made sure that everybody thought he died.
Right.
And this part doesn't really apply, but I thought at the time of another Dave Filoni show, Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Okay.
There's a particular episode where the Fire Nation has taken a bunch of earthbenders to a platform in the middle of the water. So there's no earth around, except that they're making them work with coal, which is made out of earth. So eventually the earthbenders figure out, no, we can actually stop them this way. And one of the earthbenders has the commander, who is voiced by George Takei.
Oh, wow.
Floating, and I believe it's I've forgotten the actor's name, Uncle Phil from Fresh Prince.
Yeah, I can't think of his name right now either. Anyway, carry on.
Anyway, has him, has the commander of the station floating above the water on a layer of coal, and George Takei's character is going, "You can't drop me, I can't swim." And the earthbender says, "That's okay, I hear cowards float."
Oh, epic burn.
But Kino's no coward, so it doesn't really apply. I just wanted to yell at the TV. That's okay, I hear cowards float.
James Avery is the name of the guy who played Uncle Phil.
There we go.
Of course, also was the voice actor for the Shredder in the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles animated series from the 1980s and 90s.
And I'm fairly sure he voiced that particular earthbender. If not him, someone who sounds a whole lot like him.
Right. Cool. Yeah. So either way, I would be up for any other Kino stories. I think that would be great.
Absolutely. Yeah, and he's been too good of a character for them not to do something. So, all right. Our fifth and final question. I had to put this one in here today since we talked with Caleb. Inspiration for the deck builder game. What from this episode? Obviously, the deck builder game was completed well before this episode came out, so I'm sure there's nothing directly tying this episode to the deck builder game, but there's always future expansions. So we could get something. What would you like to see from this episode in the deck builder game?
Well, I think once I've played the deck builder game ad nauseum, I'll probably have different ideas. But just looking at what we've seen so far from that game and this show, I want to see Narkina 5 be a base card for the dark
Mhm.
side. And so I could see them having it had something to do with whenever you attack a character or a card in the row and you destroy it, you get an additional reward because essentially you capture that you capture Luke Skywalker and you send him to work in the factory, right? So you get you get to draw a card or you get another resource on top of whatever reward you got from the actual bounty hunting of that card on the row.
Yeah, that would be so great. And then of course when your rebel characters blow up my prison, that's going to be great too.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
That's one thing I love about playing these types of games. You can have scenes that just kind of recreate or take different spins on what we've seen in episodes and movies. So that was going to be my answer to an Imperial base, and specifically something with keeping prisoners.
Yeah, okay, yeah, cool. We're definitely on the same wavelength. But I could also see Kino being a character card in this game, and being, if not for rebellion, at least neutral. So I'm intrigued by that idea that there are some neutral cards in the Galaxy deck, not just the Outer Rim Pilot as a neutral card. So
Yeah, and he would make sense as a neutral card because he effectively was not working for the Empire, but implementing the Empire's regime
yeah,
when he was, in charge of the room and making everybody, make the Imperial widgets. But then obviously turned to the rebel side, even though didn't officially join the rebellion, but he was clearly, rebelling against the Empire. So yeah, I think neutral card for Kino would make a lot of sense. And it would make a lot of sense for him to do something with sabotage or bounty hunting, because he's either keeping the prisoners in line or he's taken over the station.
Yeah, that was definitely a lot of sabotaging going on his part. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Well, Derek is not with us this week, but we're definitely going to do his favorite part of the show, and that is what Star Wars t-shirts are we wearing? And I have the perfect segue for mine tonight. As we know, Pablo Hidalgo posted on Twitter that the thing that they're making in the factory that Cassian and them escaped from is giant punctuation marks for all of the large yellow words that fly through space in the Star Wars galaxy. So in that light, tonight I have on my best husband in the galaxy shirt that is made with giant yellow words that my beautiful bride got for me as an anniversary present one year. So it's spectacular, and it includes some Cassian Andor crafted punctuation marks that were obviously that's what they're making in that factory. Giant.
So obviously one of the other platforms is in charge of spray painting those yellow.
Yeah, totally. That's what they do on their tables, and a whole other group makes giant letters.
Yeah.
Such a great tweet. Obviously not canon. Anyway.
What? No.
Nathan,
don't say.
What t-shirt are you wearing?
As the resident Dave Phil Cloney, I am wearing the White Wolf t-shirt, the Loth Wolf. It doesn't actually say Star Wars on there, but we know this is the Wolfpack t-shirt.
Yeah.
It was made for Dave Filoni. I mean, not literally, but in honor of
But
Dave
pretty
Filoni.
much, yeah.
So I thought about trying to wear the hat, but I still can't get it to fit over.
I gotta get you a headset that is the bone conductor ones.
Yeah, so that way I can pretend to be Lobot.
Oh yeah.
Oh man,
Lobot cosplay 60% done. I haven't seen any sign of Lando, but obviously we see Boba Fett. So Cloud City type stuff is possible, I guess.
And Lando's another one of those that could be a surprise neutral card.
Yeah.
Or maybe there's a rebel version of him in this base set, and then a neutral one later, where he's more. I'll work with the Empire if it keeps him out of Cloud City.
Well, aside from Boba Fett and the Rebel Commando and IG-88, so far everything seems to be aiming more toward a New Hope type stuff in the deck building game core set. Although there is a scout bike trooper.
Luke is definitely Return of the Jedi.
Oh yeah, you're right. I was gonna say we might end up doing expansions that are based on film, but yeah.
Yeah, but Leia, like you said, is definitely more A New Hope Leia in the white dress
Yeah.
and the sporting blaster rather than. But as we now know, part of that is based on this is the art that we already had because they didn't commission much, if any, new art for this.
Yeah. Can't wait to play that game. So March of
Oh, yeah.
2023. Yeah.
Very excited about that.
Cool. Well, if you guys want your own cool What a Piece of Junk t-shirt, you can check out our TeePublic store. Just head over to teepublic.com and search up Fandom Podcast Network in the search field. You can also find the podcast out there on the internet at fpnet.podbean.com or just search up fpnet on the Podbean app on your smartphone or tablet. And you can find us on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Podbean, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and Google Play. Please check us out on Facebook. Just search for What a Piece of Junk, a Star Wars podcast. And if you've got a burning desire to send an email to the show, fire off a missive through hyperspace, you can email us at whatapieceofjunkpod@gmail.com. And I do still run Twitter for the show, although, to be honest with you guys, with the way Twitter is these days, that might be ending soon, but I'll let you know. But for now, you can find out information about us on Twitter at WhatWars. And on Instagram, we are part of the Fandom Podcast Network account. Nathan, tell us about those Apple Podcast reviews.
Well, we love to get Apple Podcast reviews because they let us know what we're doing well, what you'd like to hear from us, what we might be able to change about the show to make it even better. And it helps other people find our show. So obviously, we want you to be honest and leave however many stars you think we deserve, but preferably 5, because that's what we think we deserve. And we hope that you think we deserve 5 as well. And it does help us keep the Wookiees fed and keep the games on the table.
That's right.
Please give us a review. Let us know what we can do. And thank you very much.
Yeah. And so we also want to thank you guys for listening to this episode. It was a bit long, but if you're like us, you were eating up all of that information about the deck building game. And of course, we could talk about Andor for hours and hours, but we won't. Instead, we're going to sign off with our usual plea to please give us your thoughts and reviews and comments. And also, please always respect each other and always respect each other's fandom. All right, Nathan, punch it.